Ethical frameworks have been aplenty in both Western and Eastern philosophies. Several scholars have done the groundwork and proposed different approaches to understanding ethics. In addition to utilitarianism and deontological ethics, we will look at some more ethical frameworks offered by different scholars. Now let us look at what is virtue ethics, which is another framework. Virtue ethics was established by Socrates and later developed by Aristotle, so it is a very old form of ethics. Virtue ethics is actor based than action based. So when we discussed Immanuel Kant's deontological ethics, the focus was on action but not on consequences, the way utilitarianism proposed. But here the focus is more on the actor. So someone like a journalist or a doctor or a policeman or a politician should be honest. So these people should have good qualities and not vices. So honesty and fairness and transparency are rules that would guide in establishing right journalistic practices. The question asked is whether a journalist is a good person. So we want them to be virtuous. So we do not want them to have such traits such as being greedy or being proud, having this quality of vanity, etc. Similarly, when a person is clean and is good, then his or her actions would naturally be right. So if you are talking about telling lies, if the person is very honest, then the person would not even think about telling lies. Next, we will look at what is called conceptual ethics. It is a branch of normative theory where we are concerned about what concepts should we use and what we should not use when we are representing the world, people, groups and communities and concepts. This is assumed greater significance as the language we use or conceptual terms we use can create identities about people, and sometimes these identities can polarize the population. So here is what physicist P.W. Brigman says: never ask what does word X mean, but ask instead what do I mean when I say word X, or what do you mean when you say word X. He says three words do not have one true meaning. So here is something that we need to turn attention to. This actually demands that channels should be careful in selecting language, in selecting words. For instance, it is easy to call a person half-naked rogue, or you can say that half-naked rogue created a ruckus in a street. But is there a need to use the term rogue? What is the semantics of the word half-naked because the man was not wearing his shirt? Perhaps speed defines news industry, but that speed should not interfere with fair and balanced reporting. BBC took a lot of time discussing how they should explain ISIS. So they said Islamic State Group. They had actually a lot of discussions and brainstorming before they arrived at this conclusion. So here I would like to refer to Stuart Chase's The Tyranny of Words, where he talks about how we use concepts that are only abstracts, but we try to point them to tangible things. I would suggest that if you get a copy of this book, you should read it, where he's talking about the semantics of words, which is very, very important. Let's now look at feminist ethics. Western philosophy and most of the ethical discourses were developed by men, and they were about women, and this is what is the criticism laid by feminist scholars. Most of the standards were set by men for women, and as a result women are subjected to inferiority. This is another criticism that they level against these ethical discourses. They define the roles and responsibilities of women, but most of the times if you look at what men have written about women, they said that these are your responsibilities, and as a result we always say that women should take care of the household chores and not men, and women should be caring, women should be nursing, etc. Feminist ethics is categorized into two types. One is care based ethics, the other one is power based ethics. When I am talking about care ethics, we are immediately reminded of COVID-19 pandemic. During the times of COVID-19, women have played a crucial role in taking care of patients, both as doctors as well as nurses. And they are also playing a crucial role in taking care of men and children at home. Carol Gilligan, a psychologist, says, through responsibilities, women develop a language of care. They shift their concern away from themselves and towards others. Care-based approach in feminist ethics critiques justice-based ethics, that is largely the domain of men. It is argued that justice-based ethics is impersonal and does not take into account needs or relationships. On the other hand, care-based ethics takes care of the needs of other people, and therefore it is an alternative approach. And feminist ethics in itself is an alternative approach to other forms of ethics. Apart from the care-based approach, feminist ethics also focuses on power-based approach. Here we are talking about power relationships, power dynamics, and how women are being subjected to abuse, violence, etc. So there is oppression, which is one of the prominent aspects when you're talking about power-based approach. Some of the aspects of feminist ethics, some of the arguments put forward by feminist scholars include oppression, violence, and abuse, etc. In fact, different forms of oppression exist. It includes gender, race, caste, and religious oppression. Sometimes it is social and economic and political oppression. Women are not being allowed to go to work, or women are not allowed to pursue higher studies. Or there are other forms of oppression along the caste lines or on the religious lines. Thus, we see many commercials that glorify these kinds of stereotyping, which is also not good. We are reinforcing this stereotyping through commercials. We objectify women, and this is resulting in what is called as male gaze. And we see a lot of commercials where there is a mother who's seen taking care of her children, who's seen taking care of dirty clothes, who is taking care of washing, who is taking care of cooking, etc. Here I would like to cite an instance wherein a cover page of a vernacular magazine focused on the dress a woman wears. And then this particular magazine goes on to make robust claims about morality and ethics of women in terms of what dress they should wear and they should not wear. I think this also extends to social media. So someone wears a certain kind of a dress, then immediately there is a barrage of complaints and allegations and shaming of women that's carried out mostly by men and sometimes by women too. This in turn produces representations about women who are further subjected to masculine modes of engaging with ethics. The language used to refer to them needs to be corrected. While abuse of any form is questionable, disclosing the names and identities of sexual abuse victims, for instance, is unethical. Thus, to correct this maligned representation, we need to have more women on board in media industries, in journalism, and in every other field. Not only women from cities and cosmopolitan zones, but also from marginalized sections and tribal communities. In the name of having more women, what is happening is many organizations restrict themselves to recruiting women from cities only. Now let us discuss what is called discourse ethics. Jürgen Habermas, a German intellect from Frankfurt School, proposed discourse ethics. It has become popular since 1980s. For instance, Kant argued for universalism. If I think that copying is not good, I immediately begin to ask if others would also feel the same, and that is what Kant says. Then copying is improper and it becomes a universal rule. Thus, one person is involved in the creation of the universal maxim based on his or her own self-reflections about what others would do if they are in a similar situation. Thus, if what others would do are different, then the value I propose loses its validity and fails to become a universal principle, and this is what Kant's maxim would say. In such a reflective process, Kant says that one should build their thinking on rationality and not on emotion. But let's look at what Habermas says. He's saying that instead of one person reflecting on how an individual's action becomes a universal law, He's not talking about one person taking a decision and thinking, okay, this is what others would do. Habermas says all people and stakeholders involved should participate in discussions and deliberations. All voices must be heard. People from different groups, for instance, if there is one group which says that abortion is right and another group which says that abortion is wrong, both groups should participate in a discussion and should reach a consensus. Probably when he is talking about consensus, he is emphasizing more on commonality and less on difference, and as a result, what happens, the criticism against discourse ethics is that you might sometimes exclude some groups, and these could be minority groups, and they don't get to express their voices and their points of view. So this is what he calls as communicative action. So again, with respect to diversity in media organizations, I think it is important to have people from different groups, people from tribal communities and other communities, people from rural areas, as well as cosmopolitan cities and metropolitan cities. We need to have people from diverse walks of life. Only then diversity can be achieved. So what Habermas is talking about, discourse, right? Everybody should participate in a discourse, and then it leads to an ethical action. That is possible. But then there are a lot of criticisms against what you call as discourse ethics, because Habermas himself, it's said, did not include women when he was talking about the public sphere. Another criticism leveled against discourse ethics is that it is likely to be taken over by groups with vested interests. In that context, the question asked is, can we create an ideal speech situation where everyone participates and discusses, following which an ethical outcome could be realized, could be seen? Can we have everybody participate? Is it possible? That's the, what if it's taken over? So there's a possibility that lobbying could happen. And if lobbying happens, minority groups probably cannot express their views and their thoughts and their ideas. So it will be taken over by the majority groups. Let's recapitulate what we have seen so far. We have seen a few ethical frameworks that help us understand what is morality and ethics. Firstly, we saw what utilitarianism is all about. It is a branch of consequentialism. Utilitarianism focuses on the consequences of an action that we take, and it is proposed by John Stuart Mill based on the principle greater happiness or greater good. So if a certain action that you carry out causes the greatest good or does the most good, then that's the action which is most preferred. It's called utilitarianism. On the other hand, Immanuel Kant focuses on what is called duty. So he is not trying to understand what consequences, or he is not trying to emphasize on what consequences a particular action would have. He wants to focus on a duty and how a duty would become a universal rule, how a certain action that you do will become a universal rule. So he says that should be built on rationality and reason. So he says reason is very, very important. Being able to reason out why you are doing a certain action, that's very, very important. So he says there is no room for emotions, there is no room for religion. So your ethical actions transcend all of these superstitions, etc. Thirdly, we saw what is known as virtue ethics, and it was proposed by Aristotle, Socrates. And this focuses more on the actor. So a person should be honest in the first place to be able to perform honest activities. That's what virtue ethics focuses on. Next, we discussed what is conceptual ethics. We have to be very careful when we are using certain concepts. It might look as if they are facts, but they are also abstract terms. And is it ethical to use such a concept to refer to a group or people or to a certain action? We just did see some examples, while discussing this particular form of ethics. Next, we did discuss what is known as feminist ethics. There are several scholars who are working on feminist ethics, about caring ethics. and so on and so forth, especially about abuse. And so they say that there is not enough that has been talked about and addressed by philosophers such as John Stuart Mill or Immanuel Kant and other Western philosophers. So there is a need for a new discipline called feminist ethics, and so a lot of feminist scholars are working on this in order to address ethics related to women, their issues in society, etc. And lastly, we discussed what is called discourse ethics, which was proposed by Jürgen Habermas. He talks about the fact that we need to arrive at an ethical action or a decision after letting and permitting everyone to participate and deliberate on issues. And this should include people who are for and against a certain thing, such as, say, for instance, abortion or capital punishment, etc. We should have all people participating and then discussing and then arrive at a consensus. Of course, several scholars have raised the question whether it would be possible to arrive at a consensus. So far, we have learnt what is morality and what is ethics. We have also discussed different ethical frameworks related to ethics and morality. These are frameworks which are proposed by different philosophers and scholars. Hope that you enjoyed listening to this lecture. Thank you.